Okay. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So inshallah, this is, I think this is session 9 for our class on the world of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I've been using this particular book by Dr. As-Salabi, hafidhahullah, that is entitled As-Sirah An-Nabawiyya, Ard Waqa'i wa Tahlil Ahdath, Durus wa Ibar. So it's a book about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it wants to do it particularly kind of like through an analysis of also the world in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived in. And so that's why I decided to name the class, right? The world of the Prophet, alayhi salatu salam, because, I like this particular book because it gives us kind of like a preamble of building up, well, what did the world of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam look like? And how and in what way could that be important, not just as a set of facts, but as I said, also for us to be able to derive something from, so that we can have some benefit of looking at our own world. So in this session, he's going to highlight what he says, what al-ilm wal-qira'a wal-kitaba 'inda al-Arab. So he's going to look at what was the world of the Prophet ﷺ like just before he was born, so like leading up to that time. Like, what were the Arabs like? What kind of people were they? So we've looked at, different aspects of Arab society, the society of the Arabs, even going back into antiquity and then right up into the time and the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. And we've looked at like how were their societies structured? How did they handle conflict, marriage, divorce, battles, you name it. And so now he's going to say, well, what kind of society was Mecca and the Hijaz and the surrounding area as it related to knowledge production? So he says, al-ilm wal-qira'a, like were they illiterate people? Wal-kitaba, right? And so he says, لم يكن العرب أهل كتاب أو علم كاليهود والنصارى. So the Arabs were not they were not a people of literature. So they didn't produce, written works, nor had they been the recipients of revelation before. At least not until going all the way back to say like either the ancient Arabs, like the people of Ad and Thamud, in which was sent, the prophets Shu'aib and Hud, or obviously going back to their proverbial great-grandfather, Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam, the son of Sayyidina Ibrahim. But in the more recent period of time, they were not really illiterate. They were not illiterate people, so they were not known for reading or writing, nor had they received scripture like the Jews or the Christians. بل كان يغلب عليهم الجهل والأمية. Rather, they were a people whose culture and their sensibilities were dominated by ignorance and blindness. And of course, I don't mean here physical blindness. It means like, blindness in terms of just their sense of justice and on. وَالتَّقْلِيد. There were also a people that were overly beholden to tradition, meaning that, all peoples have their tradition. Everybody has their tradition. Mexicans, the French, the ancient Mayans, everybody has their traditions. But sometimes those traditions can almost form a stranglehold on you that cripple your ability to develop a system of justice, and that you just follow it blindly, whether it's good or bad, whether it causes harm, it doesn't matter, right? This is our tradition. And then he says also, it was what al-jamud ala al-qadim in kana batilan. They would adhere to this, even when it was known to be patently false, but it still prevailed over them. So this is why there are certain verses in the Qur'an. We just recited this in Maghrib. So if you go towards the end of the 29th chapter, Surah Al-Ankabut, and we'll find this in other areas in the Qur'an as well. Allah Ta'ala will say things like, وَإِن سَأَلْتُم مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And if you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, and who is it that he's asking? The Arabs, right? The pagan Arabs, not those from amongst the Hijazis or the Meccans that had become Muslim, but this is just asking, if you ask any of these pagan Arabs, who created the heavens and the earth? أو شخر الشمس والقمر, and who created the sun and the moon and appointed them on their paths? لا يقولون الله. They will say, oh, no doubt, God made it. فَأَنَّ يُؤْفَكُونَ. So then, why are you then still adhering to associating partners with Him? When you say by your own admission, Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth. What is it? It's in their culture. So they had become unada, they had become people of inada, they become very stubborn. They would admit, yeah, sure, I mean, of course God created this. But, we got these, we have these intermediaries, we have our asnam, we have our idols, and it had become a thaqafa, right? It had become like a tradition for them, even when they knew it to be like silly almost. They knew it to be like almost ridiculous. وَكَانَتْ أُمَّةُ الْعَرَبِ لَا تَكْتُبْ وَلَا تَحْسِبْ. And so they were a community of people that they were known to neither really, again, they weren't people of writing great books. They were not like the Greeks that were producing this really, crazy, philosophy and writing books, or like even say like the Chinese culture. They weren't like the Taoist or the Confucianist, where they were writing like lots of stuff. And he said, وَلَا تَحْسِبْ. And they were not like, say, like the ancient Persians, or the ancient Indians, or like the ancient Egyptians, where they were people of hisab, like they were really good at math, or they were really good at astronomy. There wasn't them. And he says, وَهَذِهِ هِيَ الصِّفَةُ الَّتِي كَانَتْ غَالِبَةً عَلَيْهَا. And unfortunately, these were the qualities that had really come to dominate who they were. وَكَانَ فِيهِمْ قَلِيلٌ مِمَّا يَكْتُبُ. There was only a few people amongst them that even had the capacity to write. It was not something that was known. وَيَقْرُؤُ أُمِّيَتُهُمْ وَعَدْمَ اتِّسَاعٍ وَمَعَارِفِهِمْ. Right, so they did not have a sense of literacy. But, and this is an important but. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, how are you? Alaikum assalam.
I did talk to someone here to bring sofa.
Oh yeah, but so
No, it's okay.
المشكلة نحن في وسط الدرس مباشرا على الإنترنت.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, if you can bring it quietly over there, yeah,
Put here.
yeah, like أجانب الكرسي. Yeah, تمام.
After 15 minutes, just.
Okay, طيب إن شاء الله. بارك الله فيك. So even though those things are all true, and I think this is a beautiful part for us to contemplate on it, because we say, okay, fine, we learn all these facts. How do those facts have an impact on us today? And so there is as we would say, walakin, there is a but here. Just because the people were sophisticated doesn't mean that they were good either. I mean, you look at the Mayans, the ancient Mayans. These are actually people that I theoretically may have some connection to. Mathematically, incredibly sophisticated, very sophisticated sense of astronomy, architecture, right? I mean, they built these pyramids in the jungle, and yet they also did like blood sacrifice. I mean, like when the Europeans came to Central America, and found all these Mayan ruins, at first they're like, wow, man, these ancient peoples built these pyramids, in the middle of the jungle. It's so fascinating. And then when they got them signed, like, oh, wow, there's a whole bunch of skulls in here. And then when they did the forensics, they're like, yeah, they pretty much were, they were just chopping off heads, right? So you can be mathematically very sophisticated, scientifically advanced and all that. That doesn't mean that you are necessarily a good person. So as he's going to highlight here, we will see that despite that, there were some qualities that the Arabs did have. So he says, فَقَدْ كَانُوا يَشْتَهِرُونَ بِالذَّكَاءِ. There were people, though, they were smart. They may not have had so-called scientific knowledge, but they have a word that we use in Arabic, dhaka. Dhaka is like you were intelligent, but it also means you were like cunning. It means that you were a quick learner. You could perhaps be somewhat autodidactic, like you would pick up on things quickly. So even though they were not a sophisticated people, if you look within one generation of the revelation of Islam, they burst out into the entire world and took it over, like a massive part of the world. And that came from these Arabs that were just living in the middle of the desert that didn't know even how to write. But they had some latent talents. So he said, فَقَدْ كَانُوا يَشْتَهِرُونَ بِالذَّكَاءِ. They were known, though, to be people of aptitude. وَالْفِتْنَةِ, not fitna. Fitna is like trouble. Fitna means like you have acumen, if you could use a fancy word in English. Again, you have aptitude. You are adaptable. You're smart. And so he said that they were people that were robust. They didn't live off of much out in the middle of the desert, not a lot of food, not a lot of resources, but they were robust people. They were, to use a word, close to nature. So they knew the animals very well. They knew the stars. They were not in the way that they were necessarily like navigators, but like they knew the night sky. They knew the birds. They knew the camel. They knew, they knew the world around them, and they were very adept at describing that world. So even though they were not a mathematically sophisticated people, they did wind up developing this very rich language, right? The Arabic language is an incredibly robust, descriptive, innately poetic language. And so he said that they were, for instance, lutf al-sha'r. There were people who were given to poetry. They were like natural poets. There were people that just had a way with words. Wa irhaf al-hiss. There were people that they were sensitive, meaning they were sensitive to their environment. They had what we would say perhaps today in modern parlance is that they had emotional intelligence. And this is something that we now understand, is that there are multiple forms of intelligence. And he said, وَحُسْنَ الْإِسْتِعْدَادِ. They were people that were quick to pick a thing up. So if they didn't know it, but they could learn it very quickly. And many other qualities, like they had good perception. They were very perceptive. And they also had, he said, like a kind of they had a kind of readiness about them and a willingness to accept some things. Now this, he might be, because of the author himself, he's Libyan, they're not exactly pure Arabs. He might be a little bit overly self-indulgent here, maybe a little bit romantic, in that they weren't so perceptive, because obviously they also greatly resisted for a period of 23 years the message of Islam. But to that was a quality amongst them. And so you did see, as revelation going on, as the Qur'an was continued to be revealed, that the people did increasingly become more receptive to the message of Islam. Some people took a little bit longer, others immediately, took to it. He said, "What liqubuli ilm wal ma'rifa." So they were people that were open. They were open-minded in a certain kind of way. And so he said that, وَلِذَلِكَ لَمَّا جَاءَ الْإِسْلَامُ, so when Islam came to them, صَارُوا عُلَمَاء, they became scholars, even though they were not really what you would say, again, super literate people. And we see that in certain companions, like for instance, Ibn Abbas, very young. Abu Huraira, very young. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, very young. Many of the companions, it's certainly by our understanding today, because one, we have this idea as modern people of like, there's a child, and then there's a toddler, and then there's a teenager, which goes on for a protracted period of time, and then there's a young adult, and then an adult, and it's like, no, in the pre-modern world, there was like, either you're an infant or you need to punch in and get to work. There was like, that was about the, and if you go to other parts of the world today that are more traditional like that, it's true. Children work and that kind of thing. So, they when Islam came to them, even they might have been very young, they took revelation, they took the guidance of Islam, and despite their lack of experience, they were able to fulfill great responsibilities like taking control of an army or overseeing aspects of a burgeoning kind of community or society. So this is a quality that they have. He's writing this here not to say or not to like overly praise the Arabs, because not all of us are Arabs. The point, the great takeaway of this is that people will often have good qualities and bad qualities. Islam comes to purify what can be purified, remove what is necessary to remove, and accentuate those latent talents that all people have. And so when you look at every group of people that have had any kind of historic relationship with Islam, whether it's the people of the subcontinent, so-called people of Africa, Asia, all peoples have their good qualities and their not so great qualities. Islam came and it purified them. It removed superstition while accentuating the supernatural. Where we believe in something above nature, that's literally the meaning of supernatural. We believe in something above nature and beyond nature. We believe in the unseen, like the angels and the jinn, and of course Allah Ta'ala and the hereafter. But we don't believe in the superstitious. Oh, step on a crack, break your mother's back. No, this stuff we reject, but we affirm the supernatural. And as I've always said, like if you look, for instance, to Americans have good qualities and bad qualities. You can think of so many in our culture that are, sometimes Americans can be a little bit self-assured. They think that they're the center of the universe. But Americans, we as our kind of societal DNA have a strong sense of right. It doesn't mean that our sense of right is 100% according to the Qur'an, because of course people think like, hey, getting together on Sunday and drinking some beers and watching the football game, right? They think that's right. But Americans have a strong sensibility about, you shouldn't do things to tread on people. You shouldn't do things to harm other people, even though ironically our government is always doing things to harm other people. But the American populace, our culture, we have that. We also have a strong idea of efficiency. So, for Muslims that perhaps myself or like Dawood, that were not born Muslim, came into Islam, and then you go to the Muslim world and it's like a culture shock, because it's like you've read about Islam is perfect, well, the Muslims must be perfect too, and then you go to the Muslim world and it's like, oh, I'd like to mail this letter. Okay, Bukra, inshallah, come back tomorrow. Why do I need to come back tomorrow? It's like, Bukra, inshallah. Like, why do I have to come back tomorrow, right? Americans have a very strong sensibility about like, look, man, don't waste my time. Like time is money, even though that can be a very dunyawi thing. But at the same time, go somewhere where that is not a standard and then come back to America, you will find that very difficult to deal with. Because there is something positive about having a sense of efficiency and strong work ethic, although that has very much declined in the last generation or two. But certainly like probably Dawood, like our parents and our grandparents' age, especially, well, I would say both men and women. Men, because the work was outside of the house, their very sense of worth was rooted in that. So they were very earnest about their work ethic. And then women took a great amount of pride in taking care of the home. And, these things now, unfortunately, have kind of fallen by the side. So this is part of what he's mentioning these things for, is that the Arabs were a people no different than others. They had good qualities and bad qualities. When Islam came, it purified those things that could be purified. It removed those things that was necessary that would be impediments to receiving the message of Islam. And then it played upon and it accentuated those positive aspects of their culture. And I say this because we need to think about that as Muslims now. Like in America, for those of us here in America, how can we think about Islam in America as a reality that, sure, there are some parts about America that will require purification in terms of its culture. America can be kind of a braggart culture. That's why like our sports, every little thing you do, it's a touchdown, it's a dance, it's like, fakhar. It likes to brag a lot. And that's obviously something that needs to be purified so that you can have humility. Americans, once upon a time were a bit more humble. Now in modern day culture, and they struggle with it. So that's something to be purified. When it comes to the sexual immorality that we will see here in a minute, that he also discusses that was a problem amongst the Arabs, that is something that has to be removed because it will bring destruction upon you. But then, what is it about those aspects that are good that we should encourage and leverage? And so I gave the example, a couple of weeks ago when the young man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to make zina, so make it halal for me because I like to do it. And the Prophet ﷺ leveraged something in an Arab culture, which was this idea of ghira, right? Like as an Arab, you have a sense of ownership, pride, and protectiveness about your women. So when he told that, the Prophet ﷺ didn't go haram, ittaqillah. He said, well, okay, but what if somebody does that to your mother? What if somebody would do that same thing to your sister, to your aunt, to the women in your family? And the young man was like, Wallahi, by Allah, I would never allow this to happen. So what was he doing? He was leveraging this cultural attitude amongst the Arabs of protecting their own women. And he's saying, okay, now what we have to do is purify that and now extend that same sense of protectiveness to all women. It can't just be about the women in your tribe or the women in your family. It has to now be extrapolated to every single woman. You have to have that sense of reverence and protectiveness for all women. And so when it was explained to the young man that way and playing upon something that was in his culture, the man took the advice from the Prophet ﷺ and then he swore an oath. Ya Rasulullah, I swear to never return to it again. The Prophet ﷺ made dua for him to be successful, and it was recorded that he never returned to that particular deed again. And so that shows the mechanism of Islam is always looking for ways to improve, for cultures to improve upon themselves and not to simply wipe them out and replace it with some sort of like Arab template, because they didn't even do this with the Arabs themselves. And so when Islam came, right, it really boosted them. And he said, what's funny is that within a very short period of time, أصبح العلم والمعرفة من أخص خصائصهم, that learning and seeking knowledge for a people that just a short time ago were ignorant and backwards became to be the very defining quality of their civilization. So the new Islamic Arab civilization became one that was what? It was distinguished by the knowledge that it possessed and its attitude towards knowledge acquisition. So this shows that, anybody can be transformed. That is Islam. Islam is a transformative force. That's why we call it. It's not just simply a lifestyle or a religion. It is like a quwwah, it's a qudra, and it's a hadara. It's a powerful force. وكان فيهم من مهر في علم القص الأثر وهو القيافة. And he said that another he's just highlighting another aspect of how the Arabs were people of sensitivity and people of intelligence and awareness. As he said that they became very adept at tracking. Trying to track something in the desert is not as easy as it seems. If you've ever spent any time in the desert, sand is not exactly the best material to work with to track something, because the wind blows and it's always shifting and moving, and then it's like, boom, it's gone. He said they became very adept at this, which is not very easy. And so he said, they had their own systems of pre-modern medicine and whatnot. But again, as they spread out of the Hijaz, and then they went into the Byzantium Empire, or the remnants of that, and the remnants of the Hellenistic, the Greco-Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, which had already built up for, millennia, all of these, storehouses of knowledge about mathematics and science and medicine. They took all that and ran with it. And so he's saying that should be part of the attitude of the Muslim, is to be open in that way. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he sent companions. He said, look, seek knowledge even if you go to China. And so they did. They went as far. And that's why now why do you think you find people, in Mongolia, in Uzbekistan, and these places, and they look totally Asian, right? Well, how did Islam get there? They went seeking knowledge. And they transformed those people. And so, sometimes I don't even know, like one of the most relied upon books that Muslims use for their deen is Sahih al-Bukhari. Well, Imam al-Bukhari was from Bukhara. They're not Arabs, right? And yet he became a master of the Arabic language, a master of the science of hadith, many other areas. And so, again, that transformative quality of Islam. So what was the issue then that they were struggling with? So he said, before Islam, he said, كَانَ أَخْلَاقُ الْعَرَبِ قَدْ سَأَتْ, that the moral quality of the Arabs just before the revelation of Islam had really kind of hit a low point, and they had really lost their moral compass. As we know, they were burying their infant children in the sand and the like. And he said, وَأَوْلِعُوا بِالْخَمْرِ وَالْقِمَارِ, and that they had become completely enslaved and infatuated by drinking and gambling. So it was almost like a wild, wild west, right? وَشَاعَتْ فِيهِمْ الْغَارَاتِ, and that turned to violence, where they were raiding each other and fighting and killing. And he said, as we mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, sometimes they would have a blood feud between two clans that would last for 50, 60, 70 years, all because one dude went to go steal somebody else's sheep, and in the process killed somebody over it. And then the people that initially started the beef have now been dead 2 generations, and the people are carrying it on, don't even know about it's our tradition, it's just what we got to do. So again, they had become people they had a society of dhulm. It had a lot of oppression going on and whatnot. Even to the point that, what's that?
It still exists.
It still exists,
Yes,
right?
Afghanistan and Pakistan and Peshawar region still exists. Even a kid, 10 years old, carrying a gun and see the
right.
And
then the I think the crime, Khalil is saying it even exists today in other parts of the Muslim world, is that then people will associate that with Islam, versus this is an absence of Islam. Simply because they are Muslim does not mean that they are a perfect embodiment of the religion, or that they have completely supplanted their culture with the aims and objectives of Islam itself. Like with most people, they embrace the religion, but then after a period of time, that fades, and it kind of goes back to the initial point, which is where now the the culture becomes predominant again, and underneath it is like a kind of veneer of Islam. Right? This is something that we see, not even in just Pakistan, but even in many parts of the Muslim world. Right? That there's that. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he spoke kind of lamenting that even during his lifetime, he was saying that we became Muslim, and so we had this fervor for Islam, and we knew Islam was perfect and right, and so we wanted to do the best that we could to adhere it. But even by the time we were having kids, we looked at our own children and we saw that they would take Islam because that's what their fathers did, and that they would believe in it, but they didn't have the same zeal and the same fervor for trying to really precisely live up to it. And that's just to the children of the Sahaba, who, of course, even the children of the Sahaba are far better than we are. But he was even commenting, on that. Another aspect, he says, وَمِمَّا يَنْبَغِي أَنْ يُعْلَمَ أَنَّ الزَّنَا إِنَّمَا كَانَ فِي الْإِمَاءِ. And that fornication had become something really common, especially amongst the lower classes. Now, some people might not like this observation, but this is actually attested to when the Prophet ﷺ came back for the conquest of Mecca, and we'll call the Fath of Mecca. And so during that conquest of Mecca, as we know, it was a largely bloodless conflict. They surrendered, they gave over, the Muslims were victorious. And so as a result, the people of Mecca had to make bay'ah to the Prophet alayhi salatu salam. And so, he says, and this is in a hadith that is related in both Muslim and Bukhari, he says, وفي حديث من النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه لما أخذ البيعة على النساء بعد الفتح. So the Prophet ﷺ took bay'ah, or took an allegiance from the people to obey him, to obey Allah Ta'ala, to obey Islam, to obey him. But specifically, he took an oath from the women. He said, أَلَّا يُشْرِكْنَا بِاللَّهِ شَيْئًا. Do not associate any partner. So of course, that's going to be the first thing. وَلَا يُسْرِقْنَا. And don't steal, right? Don't make, a sariqa. وَلَا يُزْنِينَ. And do not commit fornication. To which Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, قالت Hind bint Utbah, zawja Abi Sufyan, she was outraged at this idea. She said, "Awa tazni al-hurra." Look, are you accusing free women, not slave women, but free women of committing zina? Because in her time, she's like, the only people that really are committing zina are poor people, right? They just are completely given over to their whims, and so they will just do that. And we see zina and we see fornication in our own culture. It happens at all strata of society. But it is mostly problematic, especially in the lower rung economic poor of the society. And so what the Qur'an is also going to criticize, and what the Prophet ﷺ, by mentioning this with Hind being there, is like, well, the issue is that, you might not be committing fornication, but you see yourself as these like shurafa, as these noble people, but you're not taking any responsibility for the people under you to ensure not only their physical well-being, but their moral well-being as well. So I am going to take an oath from every single one of you that you will not do this, including that you will encourage people, especially because what? They're going to still be owning people. Right? Islam just came, so people still had servants and whatnot. Hey, look, you're now responsible for your household. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ. You're going to be responsible. So, it's not enough to say, hey, there's no funny business with me, but no. You need to be responsible. No funny business with you, and no funny business with the people underneath you as well. Right? That you have an obligation to see to the moral well-being of those underneath you as well. And so he said, nothing indicates more clearly then this idea is that when Hind really kind of took offense at that. So Islam is a deen that wants to direct people's natural faculties of intelligence and aptitudes, and it wants to channel them and to make the best of them. This is why in every single culture that has had any relationship with Islam, the Turks, the Mongols, the Africans, the Asians, everybody in the initial part, it's like it transforms the society. And then as time goes on, like I said, it kind of goes back. And then that's why, we have that hadith from the Prophet ﷺ where he says that, every 100 years or so that Allah will send a mujaddid. Why? Because you need somebody once in a while to kind of like, get out the defibrillator and shock the people and, kind of revitalize them, right? And so we've seen people like this throughout the centuries that were kind of like the mujaddid that really wanted to rejuvenate the people. But overall, yes, that is, that is one of the predominant qualities of Islam, is that it wants to have that effect. So as I said, the main benefit for us is to try to think creatively about our own society and our own time. What are we doing to encourage the purification of the society that we live in? What are we doing to encourage people to leave off that which will be detrimental to them? And then what are we doing to make the most of people? Islam is not a religion by which the only people that can participate in it in a meaningful way are just simply scholars. In fact, you look at how Islam is viewed from the outside, meaning how does Islam tend to be viewed from the eyes of a non-Muslim? And they will look at the calligraphy, they will look at the architecture, they will like, man, they will be mesmerized. Non-Muslims will be moved to tears by the beautiful recitation of the Qur'an. They don't even understand what it's saying. They will go to museums and marvel at the Arabic calligraphy. They have no idea what it says. They will look at the buildings that we used to make. This is the sad part. We are, at the other end of the spectrum now where, alhamdulillah, li kulli shay, but, we're in spaces like this where before, the Muslims built these spaces that were meant to kind of like stir the imagination and make one think of an otherworldly kind of place. And so non-Muslims still very much experience this when they look at the traditional architecture and the traditional arts of the Muslims, and it still has that impact. And so we can't make everything in our Islam all about nostalgia, and we have to very much live in the reality, in the situation that Allah Ta'ala has put us in. And so we have to think creatively, what can we do to purify ourselves and to bring benefit to the societies that we live in, regardless of whether they are predominantly Muslim or not. In fact, if we look at we look at certain moments in history, for a long period of time, Islam wasn't even the dominant religion. I mean, if you go to Baghdad and these places, we think, oh, this is like the golden age of Islam and everything was perfect. Like, most of those populations were predominantly non-Muslim. But the Muslims, because of their Islam and all those things that we just talked about, allowed them to be elite without being arrogant, allowed them to be kind of like, trailblazers. So instead of like wanting to harken back to some sort of imaginary time when everything was perfect, because we all know once you really start to read history, like, man, you know what? And of course we will all say, oh, if I could only been alive at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, okay, sure. But overall, that's a lot of romantic nonsense. I don't know about you, but I love my bathroom with my bidet, right? Like, you just take, like I don't know if I could go in the past. You think, like, obviously I love a lot of things about Andalusian culture, when the Muslims were in Spain, and it's very beautiful, and the poetry, and everything. It's wonderful, But I'm like, man, I would have to go to the bathroom like that, and this 2025, I've got a bidet. That's really hard to give up. Alhamdulillah, we have things now that they themselves, if they could come forward, be like, wow, this is amazing. Like, not only do you guys have halal food, but you can eat it and like not die of dysentery, of botulism, right? So, alhamdulillah, we have a lot of things that Allah Ta'ala has, put at our disposal that we need to really think about being grateful for, and creative. I think we need to get back to ultimately having that dhaka, that creative intelligence to make the best of whatever opportunity, inshallah, that we find ourselves in. So we'll continue next week, and we'll read a couple more sections from his book, and we'll continue to explore what was the world of the Prophet ﷺ like, and how does it relate to ours. وصلوات الله تعالى على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Inshallah, we'll go ahead and pray Isha, and we'll head home.
I had a question on
Yeah.
going back to you said having fornication. In Islam, I think, I'm not sure what's the actual word for it, but if you captured a slave if you have a slave or during the war, if you capture somebody, you were allowed to have sex with them?
But even in that, this is something that there were rights that people had. What they're saying is that these people were just freely doing it without any kind of system, right? So like, for instance, in Islam, theoretically, you can have 4 wives, and then, as the Qur'an says, أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, whatever your right hand has possession over, right? Or whatever you have control over. And so there is an idea or a concept of concubinage, is sort of the fancy English term for it, which is a woman that a man has the legitimate right to have intimate sexual relationship with, but she's not fully his wife, right? And so Islam never allows just any kind of like free sexual engagement without there being some form of rights and responsibilities, whether that is all the way full marriage or whatever. But nothing was like, oh, you guys can just have friends with benefits. This does not exist, and does not exist in Islam, right? So this is something that Islam came to, and this is why, why would the young man come and say, "Ya Rasulullah, make it"? No, I don't. What do you mean this is haram? I want to keep doing this. This is great and fun, because they had this idea, and the Prophet ﷺ was like, no, you cannot have. You cannot have intimate sexual relationship as a man with another woman unless there are rights and obligations, right? Now, not all rights are the same. Just like if you come to America, you can come here as a visitor, like a tourist. You can come here as a worker. Then you can get a green card. You can become a resident. And then you can become a full citizen, right? And so there is a hierarchy within that, right? The person on a tourist visa does not have the same rights as a green card holder that does not have the same rights as a full citizen, right? So there is a hierarchy of rights, but all of them have some rights. Even if you come here as a tourist, you have some rights. And so, just to make an analogy, right? In Islam, there are different forms of sexual intimacy. All of them have some form of rights and obligation. There's not one of them where there is free of right and free of obligation.
I understood that, but I forgot the terms what they used, because my dad and brother Ahmed Dida, they used to sit and discuss. So I was very little, so I was listening to them all the time. So, but I forgot the terms what they used. But I only barely remember that if they captured the slave during the war, it was allowed in Islam to have sexual relationship with them.
And this was something that eventually the Qur'an comes to encourage people. Even so, you take like those verses in Surah Al-Balad. And so those verses, فَمَا احْتَكَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةِ فَقُّ رَقَبَةٍ. And the high road. And what is going to make a person take the high road? By here, high road, the morally high road. What is it that will make a person take the moral high road? فَقُّ رَقَبَةٍ. How do you do that, right? Freeing somebody in bondage, right? So the idea, and of course, these are such emotionally charged terms to have, I think, in the English-speaking world. If you say like concubine or slave, people just fall to pieces and they don't have the capacity to have an adult conversation about them. So slavery at the time that the Prophet ﷺ lived in amongst the Arabs was not like the slavery of, say, America in particular, like a form of chattel slavery. They were not. Now, again, you use the word slave, it's like people just can't deal with it. But even the slave, in Islam had some rights, right? You were a person that had some right to appeal. You had again, it's so hard to even say these words because because of our own history with slavery, that the slave owner, so to speak, would have rights to feed and provide and whatnot. And then there would be like a contract. It wasn't just something in perpetuity, right? That where you could eventually, get out of that. Whereas slavery in America in particular, and in the Caribbean, was a permanent form where it's like, you are a slave, your children are a slave, you will never be able to get out. Like this is totally different. And yet even with that, the Qur'an wants to incentivize the Muslim to set somebody free from that. And it offers, and this is where we have to learn to contend with, this is where we have to really learn to contend with the criticisms of the mustashriqeen, of the Orientalists and the non-Muslims. In fact, I was just this evening, was talking with a friend of mine about a book that was written by a scholar from Azhar. And I know the Azharis, man, they get a bad rap. Oh, they're like Ahl al-Fatawa, they got an opinion about this and that, and But you know what? Man, mashallah, you have to give it to the Azharis. They really they were very much focused on dealing with the challenges of the day to Islam. So you take, for instance, Abu Shubha, who was a well-known roughly, I think he passed away, Allah have mercy, in 83, Egyptian scholar from Azhar. And he wrote a book called Difa' an al-Sunnah wa Radd al-Shubha al-Mustashriqina wal-Kuttab al-Ma'asir. So he said it's defending the Sunnah and refuting the Orientalists and the modern day authors who write about Islam. And so just the very idea of the book is that we are always on the defensive. Oh, Islam allows slavery. What kind of belief system is this? It's horrible. It's evil. Because they assume, all forms of slavery are the same. But also the Qur'an wants to incentivize, even a better word. The Qur'an wants to incentivize the human being to do all number of things. Aqimu as-salah wa atu zakah. Pray and pay charity and fast in the month of Ramadan and be kind to your neighbor and be dutiful to your parent. Why does Islam want to incentivize anybody? Or what is the ultimate incentive in Islam to do anything? The ultimate in Islam to do anything is for the pleasure of Allah that will lead to admittance to paradise. So, from the Quranic perspective, not from the non-Muslim perspective, the kafir perspective, the cynical perspective, from the perspective of the Quran, it says, look, if you set somebody free that is in bondage, I will grant you paradise. Now, for a person that doesn't believe in paradise, or paradise is a fantasy, or okay, then fine, it's not, you don't have to take it seriously. But the Qur'an takes paradise very seriously. In fact, it's the only real thing. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. Right? The hereafter is what is real. This life is lahu wa la'ab. This life is a joke. Literally, mata'. It's a plaything and it's not permanent. So from the Qur'anic perspective, the best way to incentivize people to do good is to say, hey, you do this, I'll punch your ticket to go to paradise. This is from the Qur'anic perspective. Muslims, unfortunately, are like, yeah, that's cool, but I need some sort of like magical sleight of hand, backslap gauntlet, infinity gauntlet to, Thanos gauntlet to basically backslap this kafir to see the light of Islam. And no. If they don't see the light of Islam, that's because they've been blinded. And no amount of light that I shine upon it will make them see. But most importantly, I should become intimately familiar with the way that the Qur'an speaks and talks. And I said, the Qur'an is largely a book of incentives. Believe in me, you go to paradise. Believe in Muḥammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you go to paradise. Believe in the last day, you go to paradise. You believe in the angels and the unseen, you go to paradise. You believe in all of the prophets, you go to paradise. You believe in the qadar, you go to paradise. It's all a book of incentives. Obey me, I will overlook your sins. You're going to sin anyway. I built you to sin. And as in the hadith, what? If there were people that could somehow magically concoct a way to never sin, I would absolutely remove them from the face of the earth and bring about another people that would sin and then would ask me for forgiveness, and I would ask them and I would forgive them. So we don't appreciate as Muslims fully the methods by which the Qur'an itself speaks. This is something in Arabic we call the uslub, right? The style or the aesthetics of the Qur'an. From the Qur'an's point of view is, I am giving you, right? If you give me $1, I will give you $1 bajillion. I can invest one dime and I will give you $1 billion. Like that's essentially the kind of logic of the Qur'an, right? Lower your gaze. Doesn't even mean that you don't okay, yeah, she's kind of fine, but okay, just lower your gaze. You go to paradise. Fast from sun up to sundown. You go to paradise. Maybe miss a little bit of sleep. Get up in the morning. You get to go to paradise. Wake yourself up every once in a while at night. You get to go to paradise. You do what I say. You get to go to paradise. Somebody that's in bondage, I put them in bondage. I put them there, and I put them there so that they could be emancipated and they would be recompensed for their suffering, and you would have an opportunity to get your ticket punched. So I put them in those conditions, but I'm telling you to do the right thing. And if you both do it in the right way, you go to paradise. Think of the example of Abu Bakr and Bilal. Who created the circumstances for Bilal? Allah. Allah created the circumstances. And when he was put in difficult straits, what was his response? Ahad, 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 ahad. I will not say that anything other than Allah is one. And his iman in Allah was firm. And then Allah Ta'ala moves the heart of Abu Bakr to set him free. It's a win-win situation. Right? So, understanding the argumentative methodologies of the Qur'an is absolutely paramount to understanding the message of the Qur'an in its entirety, instead of constantly being stuck behind the 8 ball, always jammed up, trying to make excuses, as if the kafir has put us in some sort of straitjacket that we're always trying to wiggle out of. You put yourself in their own straitjacket by putting any credence into their doubts. They have doubts. That's why Allah Ta'ala would many times in the Qur'an would just tell the Prophet ﷺ, فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ. Just leave them people, man. I will deal with them. You gave them the message? Tamam. I will deal with them. Turn away from them. Right? So I feel, again, the Qur'an, as one of my teachers said, he said it's the most talked about book amongst Muslims that they've never read. We just don't read the Qur'an. And I know this sounds, I'm just saying this, I'm not an Arab. Alhamdulillah, Allah blessed me to learn the Arabic language, which is not an insurmountable task. There's a big difference between being able to read the Qur'an in its language and in translation. But if you can't read it in its own language, definitely at least read it in translation. Because I feel like it's a book that all of us talk about, but we really don't know. It's kind of like a stranger amongst us. But when you do finally sit down and you kind of read it, and you read it without the preoccupations of the gaze of the kafir kind of always looking over your shoulder, right? You just read it. Okay, this is guidance from Allah. Let me see what's in here. Oh, this is interesting. What's going to make me take the high road? فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٌ فِي يَوْمٍ مَسْقَبَةٍ. Oh, feeding somebody on a day in which they're hungry. أو يتيم متربة جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته أو مسكين the matraba, or a poor person who is matraba, like turab, like a person that's in the dirt, helping out somebody that's down. MashaAllah, like what a beautiful thing. Allah is saying, look, I have all these incentives. The greatest way to transform people to do good is to incentivize them, and the greatest incentive that the Qur'an can offer anybody is not money, even though that's permissible for zakah. Like in the ayah about zakah, one of the categories that we can give for zakah is people that are like, maybe their hearts are soft and they're open to the message of Islam. So, I don't know, maybe giving them some money was somehow, okay. But what is truthfully like the highest incentive that the Qur'an is like, look, I want you to do it for my sake. And if you do, نُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ. I'll overlook all your problems. I'll make all your troubles go away. And you will make, this is where the secular, you will literally make the world a better place. Because sometimes for a great many people, without first instilling in them the belief in Allah and a hereafter and a judgment and whatnot, man, people are like, I ain't changing. I'm not changing at all. But once a person's heart has been changed and softened, right? It's soft, it's malleable, it's pliable, and they see, this is about pleasing Allah Ta'ala. If I just focus on pleasing Him, whatever that form of pleasure is, all my problems are solved. Oh, you're a person in dire straits? Let me help you out. You get the help you need, I get the help I need, which is getting my ticket punched to go to eternal happiness. So that's what I mean about like really looking at how does the Qur'an speak to the human being. It is not trying to sell them, it's not trying to sell them false, as we said, not trying to sell you a bill of sale, a bill of goods. It's not trying to sell you false inventory. It's trying to say like, look, if you do this, all your problems will be solved. That's the highest form from the perspective of the Qur'an. That the offer, that like if Allah is like, we say, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Allah said, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Here's this thing called paradise. I will punch your ticket to go everything you have ever wanted, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You will never die. You'll never be hungry. You'll never be sad. You'll never cry. You will be happy. All your fantasies will be fulfilled. You will be given fantasies that you couldn't even possibly imagine. We'll start off with all of your fantasies. When we run out of that, I got fantasies that will truly bake your noodle, and it will go on forever and ever and ever. And on top of it, you will get to meet your messenger, and you will be with your Lord. what other form of incentive is there to offer? What is Allah going to give? Oh, Allah, give me another 10 years, another 100 years, another 1,000 years. Who would want to stay immortal in this world? None of us like to die. But could you imagine staying here for forever? It would be miserable. Because number one, there's not a lot of room, and I don't know. I mean, I know Elon Musk is working on it, but them rockets don't look like they're going, I don't know, man. I don't know about going to Mars, man. I don't know. And every single movie, like I was just watching Alien Earth today, and it's interesting. Like they made this like prequel, sort of prequel in the alien, mythology. And it's when somehow, this is a spoiler alert, right? The ship crashes on Earth and it contains the xenomorph, it contains the alien, right? And so they're trying to take the DNA and all the genetic material from this alien and graft it onto humans so they can make humans immortal. So like all of the science fiction, all the fantasy that they develop, from the Western world, it's all about trying to become immortal to stay in this world for forever. But then every single one is like a horror movie. It's like it don't look good. Think about it. It's like you could stay in this life for forever, and then the limits of your enjoyment would be human ingenuity. Human ingenuity is pretty good for 100 years. After that, it's not so good. But going to paradise with divine ingenuity, that sounds much better. So, inshallah, I hope that answers your question. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, was jazakumullahu khairan. Yes, please.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.